Well, as we all know, coronavirus has been a real issue for all football clubs right throughout country and metropolitan Victoria and Australia. And it's pretty tough out there at the moment for clubs trying to survive, hoping we get a season underway, and that remains problematic at the moment. One man is certainly doing his best to help clubs, considering his outstanding knowledge when it comes to football, is Terry Dillon, who set up a company called TDS Solutions. And Terry, of course, was heavily involved with the Collingwood Football Club as Chief Financial Officer, Chief Operating Officer, and was the interim CEO at Hawthorn for a while under Jeff Kennett. He's got some war stories there, and he spent 3 years and a little bit of that 3-year period as the acting CEO at the St Kilda Football Club, but was Chief Financial Officer at the Saints as well. But as I say, Terry's now out on his own with his own business and as busy as anyone at the moment helping local clubs. Terry, welcome to Game Face. Good to have you with us.
Thanks, Dan. Thanks for the opportunity. It's, as you said, difficult times, and what we're finding is a lot of our clubs need some direction in this, because basically it's something that's unusual to them, and that's probably our business, is giving them clear guidance, particularly during the COVID circumstance, on how to move forward. So that's our model pretty much.
When this started 8 to 10 weeks ago, were you thinking, gee, I'm going to be busy?
Yeah, I did. Look, we got on the front foot a little bit in terms of, I think, clubs knew or have a fair idea what's coming, but maybe not the depth of what's coming. I spent some time on developing a financial model, so much clubs could populate that in a really short period of time, so they know where their revenue shortfall will come from. So much so the AFL have actually used that and been sent out to 3,500 clubs around Australia. So there's a massive need. There's a lot of clubs under huge pressure. My tips for the clubs during this current circumstance is let's use the downtime to plan, particularly if there is a season that's coming. My concern, if we do have a season, I'd love a season to go ahead, but I'm not sure if the clubs really know what's coming their way.
What's your gut feel? Will we get a season?
Look, I'd love a season to go ahead. My concern is there's a lot of hurdles to overcome.
What's the major hurdle, you think?
Look, obviously the AFL will start at the end of June. I think community sport will start end of July, early August. I'm just thinking that's particularly in the middle of winter. It's coming a little bit late. I think some players and some clubs have tuned off a little bit. And I've just heard on coming here today that potentially Martin Pakula, the sports minister, has said there may be limited crowds for canteens and bars during the next 2 to 3 months, particularly and the leagues, for them to generate a viable model, they need big crowds at their finals, and that's probably a big hurdle in front of them now. So.
Now, you're a legend of the Coral Inn Football Club. You're now the vice president there.
Yep.
You've been involved in that club for almost 30 years.
Correct.
Your football club is in a very small haven, but it's been very successful in a couple of leagues in recent times.
Yeah.
How are you feeling about your own club?
Look, we're as ready as any club. We have board meetings every 8:30, every Saturday morning at 8:30.
Is that right?
Absolutely. And we dial in by Zoom. So it's about being forewarned, forearmed. Our footy's really healthy. We've got a really stable footy group. The key for us is to make sure if the season does go ahead that we're prepared. So we've set some targets. Some of my clubs are potentially just waiting for the decision to be made for them, whether a season does proceed. We're on the front foot. And that's my key tip to all clubs. You've got to keep moving. You've got to keep active. You can still drive certain revenues. And we ran a webinar series, which we talked about for the Mornington Peninsula last week. We gave them 6 revenue tips they can put in place now.
What's the most important one?
Lots of things. Probably the most important one is to focus on membership, albeit there may be no season. There's a lot of people come and go from community clubs for a variety of reasons. The next biggest issue is prepaid regos, prepaid memberships, prepaid sponsorship. Potentially, if there isn't a season, some of those clubs may have to refund that money. So we're steering them towards the Australian Sports Foundation, where potentially you can get a tax deduction for that. And we give them 2 or 3 fundraising opportunities. And also we give them 1 sponsorship vehicle to maintain their partners, because the clubs are concerned if there is no year, how do we keep a percentage of those sponsors in play?
Now, we know netball clubs are
Yep.
part of football clubs and a very important part of football clubs.
They are, yeah.
But could you see a netball season starting? And people are talking about that in the MPNFL and the other leagues that Game Face cover, that you could have a netball season, but you mightn't have a football season. Would that work?
Yeah, I think it could. I'm hearing some football netball clubs. The netballers may not be that keen to proceed if the footballers weren't playing, but if they do proceed, then obviously it'll happen. We've done, in the last week, we've done 2 sessions with Netball Victoria. I think we had about 100 of their netball clubs dial in across the state.
Did that surprise you that so many got involved?
No, they're a big beast. They're a massive sport, and they're trying to provide a resource to their community clubs and associations. So when return to play does actually happen, that they're ready. So we applaud them for getting on the front foot.
Now, the Pines Football Club, very well run by Jeff Svigos. They won a premiership in 2018, and they had an injury hit year last year, but still had a pretty good year.
Yep.
Very passionate club, lots of great supporters. You had a workshop with them on Monday night. How did that go?
Yeah, no, it was great. We posted a little clip we had a Facebook page, TDS Solutions Sports Admin, so we posted up a 3-minute clip of Jeff speaking post the session. Fair to say he's excited. There was a good group in attendance. There was about 15 people sitting in on the session. And look, they are organised. They are ready to put some initiatives in place just to cover the session, which is really important. But we focus primarily on structure. Most clubs are run by 3 or 4 people. Most clubs don't have a budget, Dan. They're sort of flying by the seat of their pants a little bit.
Does that concern you?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And we've done 1,100 people have sat in our webinars in the last 3 weeks. 9 out of 10 clubs have not had done a budget since Corona's hit. I'll say that again. So 9 out of 10 clubs have not done a budget since Corona's hit. So
is that because they don't know what's going to happen?
A little bit of that. The norm is about 2 out of 3 clubs don't have a budget. They're literally flying the normal, traditional, the secretary and the treasurer and the president sort of know when money comes in and out. For me, when you particularly in a league like the MPNFL, where you're turning over $400,000 to $500,000, you've got to have a budget. It's a small to medium-sized business, and if you don't have a budget, then you're at risk. Even more so now that COVID's hit. It's interesting. I always people ask me, what's the sort of key themes? And I talk about player payments. My rule of thumb, and I'm a big supporter of the player salary cap as an example, whatever you pay your players, multiply that by 3, that's what you need to turn over just to pay your bills. So MPNFL, for example, 150 or 140 times 3, they're going to have to turn over about 400 just to meet their obligations.
It's a lot of money, isn't it?
It is a lot of money. So it's really how they do that. And what we talk about a lot, Dan, is the way clubs raise money hasn't changed in 40 years. And it's the old-fashioned, gate, canteen, bar, fence signs, 15 to 20 sponsors, a little bit of membership and a handful of fundraisers. That model is completely out of date. And that's part of our sessions we did with Jeff the other night through Pines. So we've identified a model, a revenue model that clubs can follow. For example, I'm hopefully not breaching any confidence with the Pines. We've got a 15-piece revenue model. They were doing 6 really well.
Yes.
After our session with them on Monday night, they've chosen another 4. So they're going to go from 6 to 10. They don't need to go to 15. So they're focusing for the next 3 to 6 months, 3 to 4 new revenue initiatives that will give them a really healthy, viable, sustainable business model.
Are you able to share those with us?
Yeah, absolutely. So the biggest missed opportunity at community club land is membership. There's a lot of people come and go from community clubs, but clubs are not structured up to do membership that well. It's usually left to the secretary or the treasurer, or Joe Jones is sitting on the gate round 1 and they don't sell the membership because they don't know who's who at the start of the season. Membership, and I talk to clubs, if you have to give you one tip, membership. My concern with the community clubs is also sponsorship. They don't know what they're selling. They're often selling fresh air. It's often seen as a donation. They're pulling on some friendlies.
Yes.
And little Johnny's his dad's got a plumbing business. He plays in the thirds or the fourths. Here's $500. That's the sort of mindset.
So you can target the scoreboard. You can target signage.
Yeah. So
things like that.
we steer away from fence signs. We go more the digital revenue these days.
Okay.
With our clubs, for sponsorship, we focus on three things. We focus on some branding assets, we focus on the scoreboard, and we focus on a vehicle to promote sponsors far and wide, which is used by all of our clubs. So
that's obviously an area that the clubs will be hoping that they can get more money in. But, I mean, it is, again, going to be tough because there are a lot of businesses out there, Terry, that are struggling because of COVID-19. How do we ensure
100%.
that clubs can get that support?
Yeah, and look, that's a big risk. I think 2 out of 3 sponsors may drop off or may be compromised in terms of their contribution towards the club. Look, we're steering, a lot of my clubs, Dan, are spending 100 hours raising $1,000 as an example. It's not the most effective or efficient way of generating funds. So we give them a couple of revenue initiatives where they're making strong 5-figure sums, and we steer them more towards membership. We steer them more towards a sports foundation, and we steer them more towards sponsorship. And the great thing about those initiatives is the profit margin's around 95%. And the money normally comes in the front half of the season. Because most clubs, what we find with most clubs, they get a bit of money at the front half of the season. Gets to the middle of winter, weather turns, crowds drop off, canteen drops off, bar drops off. And most clubs in the last half of the season are trying to run a couple of fundraisers just to keep their head above water.
Correct.
99% of the time, that's exactly what happens. So what we introduce, and I suppose it's my 17 years in AFL at the biggest, is bring that model to community. And again, it's not the club administrator's fault because no one's teaching them any different, because that old-fashioned model I talked to you about a few minutes ago, that's all they know. And so we're bringing an AFL-type model to community, and it wakes the club up. It gives them optimism. It actually extends the lifespan of the volunteer as well, because they're blowing themselves up because they're juggling work and family and club at the one time. And what we're seeing is we're extending the lifespan of the volunteer, and we're keeping those people who are putting their time in for free, and we're keeping them around for longer.
Do you think with the impact of COVID-19 that clubs at a local level, community level, will be operating differently from now on?
They have to. They absolutely have to. I'd encourage every club to go through that financial model we just talked about earlier.
Yeah.
Until you know where you're at, you can't plan. So it's on my website, tdcommunitysolutions.com.au. If you go to COVID, you can download that model. It'll be the best 20 to 30 minutes that your club spends. In terms of, a lot of clubs think half a year equals half revenue. It doesn't. I've had well over 100 clubs complete our model. Their revenues are dropping 65 to 75%. Their costs are coming down 55 to 60%. So there's a 15% gap where if we proceed on the current basis, there's going to be a deficit at the end of the year, right? Unless they put some of those initiatives we put in place to narrow the gap. So that's why I'm saying to clubs, use the downtime to plan, focus on, we give them 5 or 6 revenue initiatives. They normally pick out 2 or 3 that will narrow the gap. So when the season does start, they're not going to be caught with their pants down.
And do you think there'll be changes permanently on the salary cap and player payments at community level going forward?
Look, personally, I think it's the only shining light in this whole crisis, the recalibration of player payments. Because I just see, going back to that model earlier where, there's still some metropolitan leagues that got a 2 in front of their salary cap, right? Remember I said whatever you pay your players times 3, that's what you had to turn over.
A couple of clubs that keep dominating at metropolitan level, and you try and say how. Yeah,
and they've got to turn over $600,000. And the salary cap, there's more clubs under financial pressure than not, Dan. Volunteers are juggling that family, club and work. And we're losing good quality people because it's too hard. I presented to a league this time last year. There was 34 presidents in the room. 21 were new.
21 were new.
21 were new. And that's a pretty good reflection on the pressure on those administrators. And most clubs are run by 3 or 4 people. And it comes back to structure. And I suppose what we traditionally do is the way clubs are being run, it just hasn't changed. You've got the same old model of committee. The finances are not quite where they need to be. They're using this old-fashioned revenue model. So what we've been able to do, I suppose, is I'm a technical person. I'm an accountant. So I was, run $50, $60 million clubs. So we're bringing that model for community.
Was it always a plan for you to set up your own business after a long career in the AFL at 3 clubs?
It's a really good question. It wasn't. Even during my AFL days, I sat with clubs one-on-one to help them. And I remember sitting down with the president of Dingley about 8 or 9 years ago with Shane Morwood when I was at Hawthorn, and just gave them some real fundamentals. As I said, there's no one educating our administrators on how to run a club. But what actually happened, when I left the AFL, Chris Connolly, former Fremantle coach.
Yes.
So he's my business partner. He's a business partner.
Oh, is he?
So I focus on the administration. Chris focuses on the coaching and the kicking. And he came to me and he said to me, so I've been speaking to Bendigo Bank, and he said the greatest challenge in community sport is that, volunteers with great intentions are thrown into virtually having a semi-full-time job in running community clubs, but they haven't been provided the skills to do that. So why don't we put together a model? It's been 5 years in the making, Dan. It just continues to get better and better and better. And we just find we've worked with 800 clubs one-on-one in the last 4.5 years. Even the last 3 weeks, we've had 1,100 clubs sit in on our webinars. 68 sat in from MPNFL last week. And we just find it gives them energy. It gives them oxygen. It gives them a roadmap. For many of my clubs, it's like a big forest. All this stuff is going on. They don't start, and our role is to keep it really simple and give them a few operational issues to manage and give them 3 or 4 revenue tips, and that puts them on track.
Did you think it would be as successful as it's been, Terry? Because, as you said earlier, you've got 35 sports or recreational activity clubs or organisations that you deal with. I mean, are you spreading yourself too thin at the moment?
Look, I think ironically the crisis has probably helped my cause in terms of we can get to our reach is far greater now.
Yep.
We've had 300 or 400 people out of Queensland in the last 3 weeks. Just Zoom. We did a session with. Normally, I'm normally travelling. Last year, I travelled 6 months out of the 12 on the road, travelling around to virtually all parts of Australia.
Technology's king nowadays, isn't it?
Oh, it is, and it's means I can get to more clubs and be more effective. And clubs weren't ready for webinars 6 months ago, or even 3 months ago, or even 2 months ago. Now, it seems like every type of community volunteer and every type of business is using Zoom, and it definitely has helped my cause for sure.
Do you think too, being involved with a couple of relatively shy and retiring types in your AFL career, Eddie Maguire at the start of his Collingwood presidency when you were one of the main administrators at Collingwood, and I say that with my tongue firmly planted in my cheek, and Jeff Kennett at Hawthorn has helped you, Terry, over the years. A couple of interesting characters there.
They look, I've been very fortunate to work with Jeff and Ed. They're high achievers. They kept the administrators honest, which is great. They're all about raising the bar.
Yep.
When you work with them closely, which I did for 14 years pretty much, not excluding St Kilda, of course, but I loved every minute of it, Dan, and it's you just want to learn from quality people, and I learned a lot from them about how to run a really strong, and I think it's been a good journey with Collingwood. We got there when they moved out of Victoria Park, and they had no dough, and the club had finished last. It was and that was a Josh Fraser draft. It was sort of, the club was in turmoil.
The only way was up, wasn't it?
And Eddie took that ride. Jeff took them on a journey too, which he built on from Ian Dicker.
Yes.
I was fortunate to be there through that journey. And again, I suppose the knowledge you've gained at the elite level, we've now simplified that for community. And the model is exactly the same. It's just a few less zeros. And we just find, I think I've got the best job in the world because we're working with people who have got great intentions. 99.9% of the people we work with are volunteer administrators, and they're doing their best for their community. They just need some direction. and that's what we provide, which is we provide some clear direction of how to take their club forward.
And there's the P word too, passionate. If you're passionate,
look,
you're halfway there, are you not, Terry?
I'm as passionate as I think I'm as invested as anyone.
Oh, no doubt.
And I mean, in terms of community footy and my role at Coralline, I played all my footy there. I'm still VP there. That's where my blood is. It's in my blood, the Coralline Footy Club. So, and I think the fact that I think my Coralline years in administration with a club with no town, and
amazing.
And what it's been able to achieve, particularly in the last. The club's been, highly successful in the last 15 years, pretty much. But up until then, it had a lot of ups and downs. But it's now a destinational club because it's well run. We invest in our coaching really well. And we've got a viable business model that pays the bills, and we meet our obligations, and we've been able to attract quality people. And because we've had a reasonable amount of success over the last so many years, we end up recruiting. Our juniors have been a real focus, but we target. It's like anything, you bring in quality people, it helps your business model, doesn't it?
Sure does. The West Gippsland Football League is where Coralline is. And Terry, how do we get hold of you? Or how do clubs get hold of you?
Yeah, so our website, tdcommunitysolutions.com.au is probably, and we also have a Facebook page, so it's TD Solutions Sports Admin. On there, we also have my email is at info@tdcommunitysolutions.com.au, so we can post it up. That'd be great. But we're actually running a webinar this Saturday morning, Dan. We'll post that up on our Facebook page, so up to 7 or 8 people can come into our webinar dealing with COVID. And when I say dealing with COVID, we go through how to maximise that financial model. We then go through 5 or 6 revenue tips that you can put in place now. And probably what we're really excited about is we're just about to launch a 7-part webinar series. It's the stuff we've been delivering for the last 5 years. We just moved it to a webinar format. So that focuses on committee structure, succession, finance, governance, sponsorship, membership, fundraising, fund saving, growing your volunteers. So they're all 1-hour webinars, and we think that's going to really hit a chord with most sports around the country.
I'm sure it will. In the words of Ian Molly Meldrum and Mayor Keen St Kilda fan, do yourself a favour, get in touch with TD Solutions, doing a great job. Terry Dillon, one of the greats of sports administration in this country, especially football, but he deals with so many other sports. Terry, thanks so much for your time, and we look forward to catching up again soon.
Yeah, thanks, Dan.